Once upon a time there lived a gentle, hard-working girl whose mother had died when she was very young. Her father later married again, hoping to give the household a new beginning. But his new wife brought with her 2 daughters who were proud, spoiled, and sharp-tongued. At first they smiled politely. Yet before long the stepmother decided that the quiet girl was too much of a reminder that she was not the mistress of the house by right. She gave the girl the oldest clothes, the smallest bed, and the hardest work. The 2 stepsisters were dressed in fine fabrics and taught to think of themselves as far above anyone who had to scrub floors. From morning until night the girl carried water, swept ash from the hearth, polished the copper, mended torn garments, and prepared meals she was rarely allowed to taste. When the day's chores were done, she would sit by the fireplace to warm her chilled hands. Because cinders and ash often dusted her skirt and hair, the stepsisters began to call her Cinderella, and they laughed as if the name itself were a joke. Cinderella did not answer them with anger. She had learned that arguing only brought more work and harsher words. Instead, she kept her eyes lowered and held onto a small hope inside her that life could not stay cruel forever. One day a message arrived at the house sealed with the royal crest. The king's son, the prince, was to host a grand ball at the palace. Noble families from all around were invited, and it was whispered that the prince's parents hoped he would choose a bride. The stepmother read the invitation aloud with shining eyes, and the stepsisters began to chatter at once about gowns, jewels, and the chance to be admired. They rushed to their wardrobes, pulled out ribbons and lace, and asked for new dresses and the finest ornaments they could find. Cinderella listened quietly, feeling the familiar ache of being forgotten. Even so, when the stepmother demanded help, Cinderella did not refuse. She pressed the sisters' dresses, stitched loose seams, arranged curls, and pinned flowers in their hair. The stepsisters argued over who should wear which necklace and who would stand closest to the prince. She whispered one day. They practiced graceful bows and laughed at Cinderella's plain clothes as though they were proof that she deserved nothing better. At last the evening of the ball arrived. The carriage was brought around, and the stepsisters fluttered out the door like bright birds, each sure she would be the one the prince noticed first. The stepmother followed, giving Cinderella one last list of tasks to finish before midnight: scrub the kitchen, sort lentils from ashes, and prepare breakfast for the next day. Then the house fell silent. Cinderella watched the carriage disappear down the road. For a moment she stood very still, and the weight of her loneliness pressed on her chest. Then, unable to hold it back, she sank onto a stool by the hearth and began to cry. She did not cry loudly. She had learned not to, but the tears ran steadily down her cheeks. "Why are you crying, child?" asked a kind voice. Cinderella looked up, startled. Before her stood an old woman with clear eyes and a gentle smile, as if she had stepped out of the shadows of the kitchen itself. Cinderella wiped her face quickly, embarrassed to be seen weeping. "There is a ball at the palace," Cinderella said softly, "and everyone is going. But I cannot. I have nothing to wear, and my stepmother would never allow it." The old woman's smile widened. "I believe you have earned a night of happiness," she said. "If you will do as I tell you, you shall go." Cinderella stared, hardly daring to hope. "But how?" First," said the woman, "bring me a pumpkin from the garden." Cinderella ran outside, found the largest pumpkin she could carry, and brought it in. The old woman touched it lightly and murmured words Cinderella did not understand. In an instant, the pumpkin changed shape, grew wheels, and became a splendid carriage, gilded and shining as if it had always belonged to royalty. "Now," said the woman, "bring me 6 mice from the mouser trap." Cinderella hurried to fetch the trap. Inside were 6 lively mice. One by one, the old woman tapped each mouse, and each transformed into a strong horse with a glossy coat, pawing the floor as though eager to fly down the road. "Next," said the woman, "bring me the rat from the cellar." Cinderella found a large rat and brought it back, trembling in her hands. The old woman touched it, and it became a dignified coachman with a fine mustache and a serious expression, as if he had driven carriages all his life. "And now," the old woman continued, "bring me 4 lizards from the garden." "Go." Cinderella caught 4 lizards and brought them in a jar. The old woman transformed them into footmen in bright uniforms, standing straight and proud. Cinderella looked around the kitchen in amazement. Where there had been ashes and dull stone, there was now a grand carriage, fine horses, and attendants waiting as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. She turned to the old woman, her eyes wide. "But what about me?" Cinderella whispered. The old woman nodded as if she had been waiting for the question. She lifted her hand, and Cinderella's plain dress became a gown of shimmering fabric that caught the light like starlight on water. A delicate necklace appeared at her throat, and her hair was arranged neatly, without a single strand out of place. Last of all, she whispered one day, the old woman produced a pair of slippers made of glass so clear and bright that they looked like they were formed from pure light. Cinderella could hardly breathe. She had never seen anything so beautiful, least of all on herself. "Now listen carefully," said the old woman, her tone suddenly firm. "You must leave the ball before the clock strikes 12. If you stay even 1 moment after midnight, your carriage will turn back into a pumpkin, your horses into mice, your coachman into a rat, your footman into lizards, and your gown into rags. Do you understand?" "Yes," Cinderella said quickly, though her heart raced with excitement. "I understand. I will be home before 12. "Good," said the woman. "Then go, and remember who you are: kind, patient, and worthy, no matter what anyone has called you." Cinderella stepped into the carriage. The horses surged forward, and in moments she was racing toward the palace, the wheels humming softly over the road. When Cinderella arrived, the palace was ablaze with light. Music drifted through open doors, and laughter echoed across the courtyard. Footmen announced her entrance, and she stepped into the ballroom. At once the room seemed to pause. Conversations faltered, and even those who had been dancing turned to look. No one recognized her, Yet everyone felt that someone extraordinary had come among them. The prince saw her at once. He crossed the room as if drawn by an invisible thread and bowed deeply. "May I have the honor of this dance?" he asked. Cinderella curtsied, trying to keep her hands from trembling. "If you wish, your highness," she said. They danced, and Cinderella moved as lightly as if music itself carried her. The prince spoke to her kindly, asking where she lived, what she enjoyed, what made her smile. Cinderella answered carefully, not with grand speeches, but with honest words. She spoke of simple pleasures: warm bread, sunlight on a clean floor after work, a story told by firelight. The prince listened as though these things mattered. All evening he kept her near. If another gentleman approached, the prince found a reason to reclaim the next dance. The stepsisters watched with jealous confusion, whispering that they had never seen such a beautiful lady, and wondering why the prince seemed to care for no one else. They did not recognize Cinderella even when she passed near them, because they had never learned to look at her carefully. Cinderella, despite her joy, did not forget the warning. From time to time she glanced at the tall clock in the hall. The night felt like a dream: the polished floors, the bright chandeliers, the roses on the tables, the prince's warm attention. For the first time in her life, she was treated not as a servant, but as someone worthy of courtesy and delight. Then, just as the music reached a lively turn, Cinderella heard the clock begin to chime. 1, 2, her heart jolted. She pulled away gently from the prince. "I must go," she said, her voice suddenly urgent. "Go," the prince repeated, startled. "But the night is not finished." "It is finished for me," Cinderella said. She curtsied quickly, then hurried toward the door. The prince followed, calling for her to stop. But Cinderella ran as if the sound of each chime were at her heels. She rushed down the steps, her gown gathered in her hands, and in her haste, one glass slipper slipped from her foot and fell onto the stone stair. Cinderella did not dare turn back. She fled to the carriage, and it carried her away into the darkness. When Cinderella reached home, the magic still held, but only barely. She hurried inside just as the last chime faded into the night. The carriage and attendants vanished. Her gown became her old dress again. Only one thing remained: the slipper on her foot, still sparkling even in the dim kitchen light. Not long after, the stepmother and stepsisters returned, breathless with excitement. They spoke of the mysterious lady who had arrived, how the prince had danced with her all night, and how everyone believed she must be of the highest rank. Cinderella listened quietly, offering to loosen ribbons and help them out of their gowns, as she always did. The sisters complained that the beautiful lady had disappeared suddenly, leaving the prince bewildered and determined to find her. Cinderella nodded, as if she had never heard anything more ordinary. The next day, a proclamation rang through the streets. The prince would marry the woman whose foot fit the glass slipper left behind at the ball. Messengers were to visit every house, from the grandest estate to the smallest cottage. And every young woman would have a chance to try on the slipper. When the messengers arrived at Cinderella's house, the stepsisters nearly pushed each other over in their eagerness. The stepmother brought the slipper forward as if it already belonged to her daughters. The first stepsister tried to force her foot into it. She pressed and twisted, but the slipper would not take her heel. The second stepsister tried, grimacing with effort, but her foot was too large, and the slipper would not slide on. The messengers were about to leave when Cinderella spoke softly from the corner. "May I try?" she asked. The stepmother turned sharply. "You?" she scoffed. "This is no matter for servants." But one of the messengers had noticed Cinderella's calm eyes and the way her voice did not shake. "Let her try," he said. "We were commanded to allow every young woman the chance." Reluctantly, the stepmother stepped aside. Cinderella sat down, lifted her foot, and the glass slipper slipped on as easily as if it had been made for her, because it had. The room fell silent. The stepsisters stared. The stepmother's mouth tightened into a hard line. Then, Cinderella reached into her pocket and drew out the other glass slipper. At that moment, the messengers bowed low. "We have found her," one said. The commotion drew the attention of the prince, who had accompanied the search that day. When he entered and saw Cinderella, recognition lit his face. Not because of the gown or the palace lights, but because of her expression, gentle, steady, and quietly brave. "It is you," the prince said, as if a missing part of the world had returned to its place. Cinderella rose and curtsied. "Yes, Your Highness," she answered simply. The stepmother attempted to protest, but her words tangled and failed. The truth was clear as the glass slipper itself. Cinderella was taken to the palace, not as a servant dragged by force, but as an honored guest. There she was dressed not by magic, but by careful hands, and she stood before the court with a quiet dignity that made even those who had doubted her fall silent. In time, Cinderella married the prince, and the kingdom celebrated with music, lanterns, and laughter. As for the stepmother and stepsisters, their pride had brought them only bitterness. Cinderella, remembering how it felt to be powerless, chose not to repay cruelty with cruelty. She insisted that no one should be harmed for what had been done to her, though she also insisted that she would never again live under their control. She built a life in which kindness was not weakness but strength. And the warmth she had always offered in the ashes now lit the halls of a palace. And so Cinderella, who had been treated as less than nothing, became someone whose goodness changed her fate, proving that patience and courage, when joined with a little wonder, can open doors that once seemed locked forever.